Right from the beginning of One Piece, we are being told that the Marines are the greatest enemies for pirates, and a massive obstacle for Luffy becoming Pirate King. To put it simply, pirates want absolute freedom and change, while Marines want control and stability. And so Luffy's path to becoming a legendary pirate is full of battles with the Marine organization. However, during this mini arc about Luffy's childhood, it's actually explained to us that his grandfather, who raised him instead of his parents, and who is one of the most powerful and famous Marines in the story, always wanted Luffy to follow in his footsteps. Now in the end, Luffy of course chose to follow in the footsteps of Shanks instead, quickly becoming a pirate and a prime target for the Marine. But that still leaves a very interesting question on the table. What if Luffy never got inspired by Shanks? What if instead of a pirate, Luffy had become a Marine? Our story starts during Luffy's childhood, where he originally got inspired to become a pirate in the first place. Of course, we could simply assume here that Luffy never meets Shanks in the first place. However, I think we still want Luffy to eat his devil fruit that Shanks brought with him. Instead, Luffy needs someone else to be inspired by before Shanks ever arrives on his islands. So for our specific scenario here, I want to assume that Luffy's grandfather Garp brings along one of his former students to visit Luffy. The Marine Admiral Aokiji. That's this guy here, with ice powers. In the actual storyline, Aokiji has always been sympathetic towards Luffy. He was relieved that Luffy took in Robin, and allowed Luffy and the Straw Hats to escape multiple times. Basically throughout the story, we're being told that Aokiji is basically the ideal Marine who has a fair sense of justice, and truly cares about the safety and the happiness of the people. So Luffy, who badly needs a role model, sees him using his epic ice powers and beat up some bad guys, which I think would be a great alternative to Shanks. Now saying goodbye to Luffy's grandfather Dero, Aokiji makes Luffy promise to one day become a great Marine as well, and so now Luffy's new goal is not to become Pirate King. Instead, he now wants to become the Marine Elite Admiral. And with that, we have the decisive change in Luffy's story. And from here on out, the rest of his childhood can stay pretty much exactly the same. Training with Garp, Sabo, and Ace Jenks, then still arrives at the islands. Luffy still befriends his entire crew, and he still eats his devil fruit because he gets too hungry. But what happens next is where it gets really interesting. Before we can talk about what happens with the other Straw Hats and how the story overall plays out from here, I need to make two assumptions about the main storyline that are very likely to be true, but haven't officially been confirmed yet. Assumption 1 is that Garp is a member of SWORD. In case you don't know, SWORD is a secret group within the Marines that doesn't like how the Marines are being controlled and used by the corrupt world, government of the One Piece world, and instead want to create a much more just and good Marine Corps. And assumption 2 is that Shanks knows that Luffy is important to change the world, and that Shanks wants Luffy to become Pirate King and find the One Piece. In case you're already caught up to the manga and don't mind spoilers, I do have two videos discussing both of these claims in detail that you can watch later. This one and this one. But for us right now, it's only important to know that Shanks really tries to inspire Luffy to become Pirate King here, but fails however. Even though Luffy wants to become a Marine, thanks to Shanks, he still very much likes the idea of having a sort of crew or team around him. Now skipping forwards to 10 years later, Luffy sets out in his small boat in exactly the same way as he does in the main storyline. However, this time, his goal is not to find a pirate crew, but instead find a Marine base where he can enlist into the Navy. Now what's important to know here is that he's still Luffy, and he still has no experience of sailing a boat. So once again, he ends up in that barrel on Alvida's ship. Here he saves Kobe, and the two of them end up in the exact same town as before. This time not to actually look for Zoro and recruit him, but to join the Marines at the base in the town. However, when Luffy sees Zoro tight in the courtyard and talks to him, he starts to realize that the Marine captain and his son here are terrible people. And so Luffy, being Luffy, I like to think that he still takes an interest in Zoro and decides to set him free, even if it will cost him his dream of becoming an admiral. And so after he beats up X and Morgan once again, he asks the Marines if he, Kobe, and Zoro could still join the Marines, even though, of course, he never discussed that with Zoro in the first place. Now, I think what would happen here is that even though the Marines of the base are actually really thankful to Luffy, like it happens in the main storyline, when more soldiers arrive from the Marine headquarters to arrest Morgan, he tells them about Luffy's attack on the base. And as a result, the captain of the squad, who just run, tells Luffy that, even though he is really grateful for what he just did, he can't let someone join the Marines, who attacked one of the higher UPS when it looks like Luffy has to give up on his dream. Though to everyone's surprise, Garp is also on board of the ship, however, who had come to pick up Luffy personally. And as we all know, Garp isn't someone that cares about the rules or the higher UPS at all, and he just decides to take all of them in as recruits. So now Luffy, Zoro, Kobe, and Zolneppo are making their way towards the Grand Line and Marine headquarters on board of Garp's ship. And of course, he trains them really hard every single day. Now remember, Garp was able to teach people like Kobe and Helnetbo, who are really nobodies when he picks them up, a ton of super strong techniques in a matter of months. So just imagine how fast Luffy and Zoro would grow under his supervision. Next, since Luffy and Zoro are not in need for a better pirate ship, this time though, they never make it to Sur, a village where they meet Usopp in the main storyline. And as a result, Captain Kudo can execute his plan to plunder the village, and Usopp is being killed. Now Sanji, however, is a completely different story, and they do have to go on a small tangent here. Usually Marine ships have a unique ability that pirate ships don't. While all pirates must enter the Grand Line by going through Reverse Mountain, Marine ships can actually cross the so-called Calm Belt, which is a strip of ocean between the Grand Line and the D-Normal Ocean that has no wind and is filled with giant sea monsters that sink any ship that tries to pass through it. However, the bottom of Marine ships are all coated in a special material called sea stone that basically makes them invisible to these monsters, so they can enter and leave the Grand Line when and wherever they please. And so Garp could take them directly through the Campbells to the Marine headquarters. But I do like to think that he would want to spend as much time with his new recruits as possible before showing them to the fleet, Admiral Sengoku and the other higher UPS, and also show his grandson the world a little bit. And so for our scenario here, I'm going to assume that Garp would take the ship towards Reverse Mountain instead. As a result, they once again would pass by the Braille on their way to the Grand Line. Again, this could go either way, because Luffy really needs to do some convincing to get Sanji to join his crew in the main storyline. But I do like to think that he would convince Sanji once again to see the world with him, and look for the All Blue as a Marine this time. Meanwhile, Zoro would of course still get his epic duel with Dracula Mihawk, something the other Marines are against, but Garp allows anyways, because he just wants to see what Zoro has to offer. Mohawk then takes an interest in this Marine grunt, who is willing to sacrifice his life for his honor as a swordsman. Now after that, there's of course also a real chance that they never meet Nami and simply pass by Arlong Park. However, there are two possible reasons why Garp would take them there anyways. Maybe he just heard about the corrupt Marines in the area that Arlong had paid off to leave him alone. Definitely something that Garp would do, I think. Or maybe Garp knew Belnair, which is Nami's foster mother, who was a former Marine soldier that then found Nami as a baby and was later killed by Arlong. After all, both Garp and Belnair were from the East Blue, so he might have decided to visit her grave on the islands. And so in our scenario, Luffy, Kobe, Helmeppo, Zoro, and Sanji meet Nami and later find her crying in the city plaza. Once again, Luffy takes them to Arlong Park and beats Arlong in memory of her mother Belnair. And in order to draw a map of the world, Nami also decides to join Garp's squad and help Luffy. After that, Luffy is then promoted from Grunt straight to Seaman First Class for defeating a powerful pirate, which I think would be quite similar to his 30 million berry bounty that he gets in the main storyline. And the last stop before entering the Grand Line is Logtown, where the group meets Smoker, who immediately takes a liking to Luffy. Moko already started to like and respect Luffy more and more in the actual story, despite hating pirates. So I think he would vibe really well with Marine Luffy right from the get-go. And while Zera is looking for new swords to replace the ones that he lost against Mihawk, Luffy runs into his father Dragon, who is having a tense conversation with his grandfather. And then they finally answer the Grand Line through Reverse Mount. Here they meet Crocus, who is a former member of Gold D, Roger's crew, the first pirate king. Crocus, just as in the main storyline, of course knows about Luffy from Shanks, In the main storyline, he then helps the Straw Hats by telling them about the final island on the Grand Line Laugh Tale, and by giving them the Lark Pose, which is a necessary compass, sort of thing to navigate from islands to islands. In our version, however, Crocus is not of too much help. He greets Garp because they once fought together against the legendary Rocks pirate crew many years ago, and he then tells Garp that Luffy is special and should have become a pirate. As a result, Luffy doesn't even know about Laugh Tale yet. Here afterwards, the group of young Marines also encounters Vivi, now Garp who knows her father Cobra. But the king of Alabasta recognizes her as the country's princess. And so under tears, Vivi tells them about Crocodile and what he has done to her country. Luffy then promises her to take her back home and help her. On the way there, they stop at Drum Island because Garp has heard rumors about Ace having been there, worried for his foster grandson, who is chasing after Blackbird. They ask in the village if anyone has seen him. Luffy is not able to free Drum Island from WAPOL though, because he is an official ruler, protected by the world government, but he does at least get to meet and recruit Chopper as well. Shortly after that, they then finally reach Alabasta, where they once again run into Smoker to together investigate what is going on with Crocodile. When they finally meet him and try to expose him, the warlord laughs at Luffy and Vivi that they can't do anything, and Luffy prepares to fight him. However, Garp steps in to stop Luffy. The warlords are part of the world government and can't be touched by Maurice. Luffy will have to wait until Garp reports this to Sengoku and the other higher UPS. Now, as you can tell, Luffy at this point is probably starting to get really frustrated and angry at the Marine system for its unfairness. At this point, clearly what is happening here is bad, and Luffy's just supposed to let it go. While traveling the country, Luffy quickly gets to meet Ace, and then his group runs into Nico Robin. Now Garp has no other choice than arresting one of the most wanted people in the world. When Luffy asks him for an explanation, Garp simply tells him to be quiet. However, shortly after leaving Alabasta, they then run into Luffy's mentor and hero Aokiji, who is biking on the ocean. Just like in the main storyline, Aokiji came looking for Robin to make sure that she was okay, and he actually manages to convince Garp to not turn her in, but to actually let her escape. Now this, of course, gives him even more plus points in Luffy's book than he already has, who then invites Robin to join the Marines. Garp and Aokiji yell at him that that's impossible. However, a short time later, Robin is instead picked up by the revolutionaries and Dragon, although no one knows who contacted them in the first place. Now, since they're on the Marine ship this time around, other than the main storyline, Luffy this time simply passes by Gyre, Water 7, and Thriller Bark. As a result, Frankie is at some point caught by ZP9, while Brook is stuck in the Florian Triangle for just a little bit longer. However, he gets his shadow back just a while later, either when Moria gets defeated at Marineford, or when he tries to attack Kaido in Wano once again, and fails instead. Luffy's group manages to capture some high-profile pirates with high bounties, testing out their new skills. At this point in the story, Luffy's already able to use Haki, and also use the techniques of the 6 powers. Now before they finally reach Marineford and the headquarters, they stop at Saber Odi Archipelago, where Garp wants to introduce Luffy and the others to a pirates called Extra. Now Drake is one of the few officially known members of the secret Sword Organization, and even though Luffy and co don't know about it quite yet, Garp is already planning to integrate all of them into Sword as well. On the island, Luffy also finds his way into the slave auction house and is absolutely appalled. Being the Celestial Dragons by human beings as slaves reminds him of the Great Terminal and how the Celestial Dragons sung that bullshit back then as well. And so just like in the main storyline, Luffy's about to punish the Celestial Dragon Charlos when Rayla makes his appearance. Using his Congress Haki, he knocks out almost all the people in the auction hall and takes Luffy and the others to his bar. There he introduces himself as Roger's right-hand man and tells Luffy that he's been waiting for him. Tries to convince Luffy to quit the Marines and allow him to train him. Now Luffy has, at this point, experienced a number of really heavy setbacks to his confidence in the Marine organization. But at that moment, where Luffy's actually considering joining the Railer, Garp comes rushing in through the door, and after a short and heated conversation with Rayler, pulls Luffy back to his ship. With a quite tense atmosphere, finally they arrive at Marineford, where Luffy, Zoro Sanji, Nami Chopper, Toby and Helmippo are all finally introduced to Sengoku, Kizaru, and Akainu. Now Luffy does like Sengoku well enough, and seems neutral toward Kizaru. But it's clear, right from the start, that he already has the strongest liking for Akainu, for the way that he talks and acts about pirates. After that, the next few weeks, Garp and other officers trained the group hard and sent them on a number of small missions. Luffy is even promoted to one of the youngest captains in Marine history for his incredible fighting abilities. However, then, news arrived that his brother, Ace, has been captured by Blackbeards and handed over to the government to be executed. And Luffy, of course, completely snaps when he hears those news, and it takes Garp's and the rest of the squad's collective effort to stop Luffy, marching straight to Impel Down by himself to break Ace out instead. Marineford starts to prepare for war against Whitebeards. Now, as a result of Luffy never coming to save Ace, the prison break from Impel Down never happens. Junbai doesn't manage to escape from level 6 either. And most importantly though, without Luffy's great escape, creating a lot of chaos, Blackbeard's attempt to recruit the level 6 pirates backfires spectacularly, and he and his crew are defeated by a Magellan. Now the war against Whitebeard itself happens similarly to the main timeline, only that Luffy refuses to fight at all. Now there are a few different ways that this scenario could go, of course. One option is that Luffy just snaps and joins up with Whitebeards to try and free Ace anyways. We do know that Luffy would do anything for his brother, so it's not all that unlikely that he just throw his Marine career aside to do the right thing. But for the sake of the story, let's say that Sengoku or someone else stops Luffy from doing anything when Ace is finally executed by Akino, of course, for continuity's sake, which of course absolutely breaks Luffy. Now Kobe and Shanks stop the war once again, but this time Shanks actually walks up to Luffy and talks to him. He tells Luffy that he has the power to make the world a better place and tells him to meet Shanks in 2 years in the New Worlds. After the war, only slowly overcoming his pain from losing Ace, Luffy trains hard for 2 years, and finally Garp invites all of his students to join Swords. Luffy then takes the opportunity to meet up with Shanks and joins his crew as an undercover agent, like Drake does with Kaido or Aokiji with Blackbeard in the main storyline. Shanks then trains Luffy even more, teaching him the truth about his devil fruits, the importance of finding the One Piece, and reaching Las Tail. And at this point, I would say that Luffy either fully goes back to just being a pirate and becoming Pirate King, or he weighs as a part of Sword, reaches Love Tail, changes the world, and actually manages to become the Fleet Admiral of a marine organization that is free and independent of the world's government. Really, at this point, I think that Luffy is just such a special person that even as a Marine, he would still be able to change the world. So maybe a much better question to ask would be, what would happen to the One Piece world if Luffy was never born in the first place? Because that one is a lot darker timeline than this one. If you're curious, you can watch that one right here.